first met Minoma Littlehawk-Sills, that is our speaker today, at, quote, the battle or the massacre at the Washita historical site. She was the park ranger, and I was there with a group of students, as normal, going through, and we developed quite a friendship from that experience. I was one of the first that actually recognized her talent as a storyteller of her people. And I certainly wasn't the last, as she is now a noted scholar in that field. And she has quite a gift to share. Today I am as interested as all of you are in the research of the intersection of the Cheyenne-Arapaho history and the timeline of Temple Houston. You know, there's renewed interest in Temple Houston with a new historical marker that's going to be placed downtown here in Woodward, and the intersection of the interest of the Cheyenne-Arapahos in our area by having a national park in Cheyenne, Oklahoma. You know, Temple was the youngest son of Mr. and Mrs. Sam Houston, and he is considered the favorite adopted son right here in Woodward, Oklahoma. A place he called home. A place he called home to the point that he had his entire family as well as himself buried right here in Woodward, Oklahoma. He spent a number of years helping indigenous people who wanted his help and also his skills as a lawyer. He was fascinated by Indian culture and collected many artifacts during his life. Today's speaker is a direct descendant of the Sand Creek massacre that happened in Colorado. Also the attack that happened in Cheyenne, Oklahoma at the Washita, and the fight that we know of as Little Bighorn. Minoma Littlehawk-Sills is a Cheyenne-Arapaho Tribal Elder who provides personal perspectives on historical as well as human aspects of the struggles of Native Americans in the 19th and 20th century. Her presentation today at Plains Indian and Pioneer Museum, where she has presented many times before, are always well received, informative, and quite entertaining. We thank Plains Indian and Pioneer Museum's board for hosting this presentation. Thank you, Rob Robertson. Robin Howeiler for writing the grant and allowed this program, and the Oklahoma Humanities for granting us the financial means for today's presentation. We also, as previously stated, thank the Woodward Tourism for their help. So, turn off your cell phones, sit back and enjoy, but let's together take a journey back in time, the title of our program. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Minoma Littlehawk-Sills.
Good afternoon. With this presentation, it's going to be the first time that I've done one like this. I usually just focus on the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and other tribes within my talks, but this time I'm kind of focusing on Temple. And it's going to be a timeline from the time he was born up until when he left the earth. The name of my presentation is A Journey Back in Time. Today, the Cheyenne and Arapaho are considered as one tribe, but were once distinct nations that called lands far from Oklahoma home. Their resilience to survive, to not lose our identity, to fight for our lives never ceased. My ancestors endured sickness, disease, and attacks. Now, during the hard times living on the plains, there were friends who helped us and took care of us and looked after us in the best way that they could to keep us safe when we didn't feel like we were being kept protected. Men like Silas Sewell, Ned Wincoop, Father Peter Powell, Temple Lee Houston, and others. Men who were raised with the knowledge to respect life, good morals, generosity, humility, and care. Even though Temple had his father's fame, he made a hefty name for himself. He was the most celebrated as one of the prairie dog lawyers. And I had never heard of those words before until doing my research about Temple. And a prairie dog lawyer back in that time were pioneer advocates that chased justice on the Texas and Oklahoma plains in the late 19th century. Like his father, Temple stood more than 6 feet tall. He was said to be best shot in the West and often carried a pearl-handled pistol. Old Betsy, his white-handled Colt revolver, was always strapped to his waist. Although flamboyant and sometimes eccentric in dress and appearance, Houston won a reputation as a brilliant trial lawyer and a gifted speaker. And when he spoke, everyone listened. August 12, 1860. Temple was born in Austin, Texas. He is the youngest child of Sam and Margaret Houston, and the first child to be born in the Texas governor's mansion. Now, before his birth, there was a lot of things going on the plains. And before he was born, in 1859 through 1879, the Cheyenne fought and continued an ongoing war with the U.S. Army. During the same year of Temple's birth, negotiations of the Treaty of Fort Wise began between the Cheyenne and Arapaho and the U.S. representatives. Also during that same year, Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election, making him the 16th president of the United States. In 1861, the Civil War began, and Kansas entered the Union. 1863 through 1865, the Colorado War. November 29, 1864, the Sand Creek Massacre. In 1865, Romano's fight and the battle on Tongue River. In 1866 through 1868, the Northern Cheyenne and the Sioux opposed the construction of the Bozeman Trail. In 1867, after the death of Temple's parents, at the age of 7, he went to live with his older sister in Georgetown. In October of 1867, the Medicine Lodge Treaty replaces the 1865 Treaty of the Little Arkansas. The new treaty attempts to move the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Comanche, Kiowa, and the Apache to Indian Territory. And they had also hoped that this withdrawal would help in the opposition to construct a railroad that was being built And then 1868, the Treaty of Fort Laramie with the Northern Cheyenne and the Northern Arapaho. Now, I have to say, I've heard two different stories about how the Arapaho and the Cheyenne came together. I did research and seen it was in the early 1800s where they were starting to be together all the time. But I also read in some of the Cheyenne history books where we were already together in the 1700s. And then there was a big split that was done, and then there became the Northern Cheyenne, the Northern Arapaho, and the Southern Cheyenne, and the Southern Arapaho. In 68, the Battle of the Washita. In 1873, at the age of 13, Temple joined a cattle drive to Great Bend, Kansas. Can you imagine being on a cattle drive at age 13? Age 13, I was playing with dolls. Later, he worked his way east and was employed as a night clerk on a riverboat. He traveled down the Mississippi River to New Orleans, where he met Senator James Wainwright Flanagan, an old political friend of his father's. Temple was able to obtain employment as a page in the United States Senate because of him. As we go down through time, 1875, the Indian Homestead Act was being established. Also, if you think too, 1875 through 76, approximately 15,000 gold seekers were in the Black Hills. 1876, the Battle of Powder River. Soldiers attacked and burned the Cheyenne village in the dead of winter. And they were able to escape with their lives, but only with what they had on. And they knew where Crazy Horse was camping, where his people were. And when he seen the Cheyenne coming to their encampment, they had already got word of what had happened at the Powder River. And so when Crazy Horse sees the people coming, he tells those in his camp, help them. Give them shelter, give them food, give them clothing, give them what they need. Also, there was the Battle of Wolf Mountain. And the Wolf Mountains up in Montana are beautiful. And then there was the Rosebud Battle. And the Rosebud Battle really intrigues me. Now, my ancestors were involved in all these battles. But with the Rosebud, I read where my great-great-great-grandfather Little Hawk in Northern Cheyenne in Lakota was involved with the Rosebud Battle because he was out taking, surveying the land, making sure nobody was coming up, just protecting the camp, the encampment. And he was the one who saw soldiers coming. And so he went back to camp and notified the warriors and the women and the children. And so that battle, the Cheyenne actually won. I can't think of the soldiers, the group of men that were the soldiers that were there, and the name just slips my mind now. But they ended up packing up and taking off. They knew they could not beat the Cheyenne in their old home territory. And then in 76 also, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Custer's last stand. Now the Rosebud battle was 2 weeks before the Little Bighorn. Tensions were already heating up during 1876. And something that gave me pause to think about when I shared the story of the Little Bighorn, when I worked at the Little Bighorn, to help me kind of put it in perspective. Those who lived in the East were celebrating freedom, but yet we were fighting for ours. We were told that if we did not go to reservations that was for us, that they would come and find us, the government would. So, like I said, they were celebrating freedom, oblivious to the genocide that was happening on the plains. The light bulb was being invented, had a patent on it that year. The telephone was being experimented on, and Sears and Roebuck opened in 1876 during all this stuff, all this was going on out east. And Temple Houston, after 3 years in Washington, D.C., had influenced Houston's decision to enter law, and in 1877 he returned to Texas, enrolled as a cadet at a newly established agricultural mechanical college known as Texas A&M University today. In 1877, while Temple is broadening his horizons, the Cheyenne, or American Indians, all the tribes were being put through a lot. In 1877, the Northern Cheyenne are forced to march from Fort Keogh, Montana, to Darlington Agency here in Oklahoma. 1 year later, approximately 300 half-starved Cheyenne break out from imprisonment at Darlington Agency and flee right through the multiple U.S. Army patrols until they reach Yellowstone County. Now, my ancestor, Little Hawk, was with those 300 people that escaped and started traveling back north. It was a struggle for them. There was one time where a fight ensued where some women and children lost their lives. It's by Alba, and there's a name for it, I can't think of it now. But the women and children were trying to protect themselves, and they found caves in the side of the canyon, you know, because you go north, you'll go into a canyon area. And so some of the women and children didn't make it. You know, some of the soldiers found them and killed all of them. And those that were left, I mean, they still fought to move back up north. After all that fight and struggle, in 1878, Northern Cheyennes were allowed to go back north after being forced to Oklahoma. In 1880, Temple transferred to Baylor University at Independence, where he studied law and philosophy and graduated with honors. In 1881, after reading law in Georgetown, Houston was admitted to the bar, and he was now a practicing lawyer in Texas when he opened his office in Brazoria. He was appointed the county attorney at the age of 21. Temple became the youngest licensed lawyer in Texas. 2 years later, in 83, Temple was appointed the first district attorney for the Texas Panhandle, based in Mobile, Wheeler County. His district covered 14,000 square miles, an area about the size of Switzerland. He prosecuted a murder, an assault, stock theft, prostitution cases. Gambling was also illegal, but Temple didn't feel like he could come down too hard on the gambling because it would cause him to more or less arrest the whole public, all the people, because they like to gamble. So he didn't think it would do any good for him to reinforce that law. He developed a reputation as a fierce advocate and a magnificent orator. During sessions of court, people came from throughout the area to witness the courtroom drama. Camping out for several days, it was worth the loss of time from farming or ranching to watch old Sam's boy perform. And I think he would have been pretty cool to meet, to know. And to see him in his beaded vest and his buckskin whenever he wore that, and his big hat, the way they described the hat was like a big sombrero type pointed hat. I mean, it was, and there was a star in the middle of it. I can just envision this man being like this, humble and then willing to help. He was offered a post-district attorney post with the 35th Judicial District, which encompassed 26 unorganized counties in the Texas Panhandle. I bet that was some wild times. Houston returned to Brazoria to marry Laura Cross, a planter's daughter, on February 14th, 1883. And I read somewhere where he didn't want to be alone. So that was why he went back and married Laura. They set up housekeeping just outside Fort Elliott. And the Houstons had 7 children, but only 4 survived infancy. By 1884, the Northern Cheyenne and the Tongue reservations were being established. Beautiful country up there. Temple was elected state senator, the youngest in history at the age of 24. And this was in 1884 also. By 87, the General Allotment Act, authorized by Senator Henry L. Dawes, passed Congress. In 1888, as a result of support to some unpopular political causes, Temple decided not to seek a 3rd term in the legislature. Temple was also unsuccessful in his bid to become Attorney General. Therefore, and thereafter, Houston concentrated on his work as an attorney for the Santa Fe Railroad. He moved his family to Canadian, where he continued his private practice as a defense attorney and became closely associated with Harvey E. Hoover. Because of Temple's talent to speak, he drew a crowd of 50,000 to hear the dedication of the new Texas Capitol building in Austin. And 50,000 people to hear you talk. That's a lot of people. The unassigned lands are open to settlement here in Oklahoma. This is in 1889. By the 1890s, the Oklahoma Territory was organized and Temple was a criminal defense attorney. Accounts of his courtroom performances are legendary. And like I said, the Senator Dawes started this Allotment Act for the Native Americans. So the Dawes Commission was created in 1893. The Great Land Run into Oklahoma's Cherokee Strip on September 16, 1893, prompted Houston to move his practice to the new town of Woodward. And the following year, Temple Houston, along with his family, moved into this area. And when he moved to this area, that is when he embraced his wife's Catholic faith and helped establish Woodward's first Catholic church. He was said to have a silver tongue, and his unorthodox behavior became legendary throughout the Oklahoma Territory. Soon, by 1897, he became in wide demand as a lecturer. Houston's reputation as a gunfighter gained him dubious fame, as well as a number of dangerous enemies. Once, while he was in Enid on business, an unknown assailant fired on him. But a copy of Oklahoma territorial statutes that he was carrying stopped the bullet. Houston incorporated the firing of a 6-shooter loaded with blanks into his courtroom theatrics on one occasion. I could see people scattering, them not knowing that there was blanks, but I could also understand why he done what he done. Temple also successfully defended Minnie Stacy, a reputed madam, at Woodward. Temple delivered his soiled dove plea in a makeshift courtroom in Woodward's Opera House. The argument on behalf of Minnie Stacy, a prostitute who worked at the Dewdrop Inn, became famous for winning her acquittal after only 10 minutes of consideration by an all-male jury. And when I read the soiled dove plea, I kind of thought, "Ooh, he's really hitting them good," because it was an all-male jury, and they were wanting to put her in jail. But the way that Temple represented her, he slickly put the blame on men for her life being the way it was. Temple became widely known and popular for his courtroom dramatics. He was charged with murder in the shooting of a brother, the outlaw Al Jennings, after an argument in the Cabinet Saloon, and he was acquitted. I bet he was doing some fast talking there. All the while, during all this that he's already doing, he still continued making frequent visits to the Panhandle towns as the legal counselor for the Santa Fe Railroad, and established a lifelong friendship with Judge James D. Hamlin. 1904. Houston's enormous popularity made him a prime candidate for various public offices. He finally agreed to let his name appear among the possible contenders to be Oklahoma's first state governor, but he was in poor health and had less than a year to live. August 15, 1905, Houston died from a brain hemorrhage at his home in Woodward. He was interred in the town's Laurel Land Cemetery. The life that ended 2 years before Oklahoma achieved statehood was among the most remarkable to emerge from the American West. Temple spoke Spanish, French, Latin, and 7 Indian dialects. That's awesome. He quoted the Bible, Greek scholars, Shakespeare in the course of his work, and was, upon his death at 45, recognized as one of the finest trial lawyers in the country. He was very statuesque, articulate, temperamental, fast with a gun, and overly fond of whiskey. And his life inspired 2 biographies, and one of them was Cimarron, and that film received an Academy Award. I really like the fact that Temple and his mother and his father, they helped the American Indians. They would let them camp on their property so they'd have a safe place. There's a letter that was written. It came from White Shield. But I know that he probably had help writing it. And I know that those elders back in that time, their English wasn't the best. I believe I read somewhere where a child or someone that was already going to school helped White Shield with this letter. And I want to read this letter to give you an idea of some of the help that was asked for. I thought of writing a short request to you this evening. You know I write a letter to you. You know I write a letter to you some time ago, but never did hear from you. Once more I send this letter to ask you your favors. You know the first time when I wrote you, I gave you a sample work, and you know what to do. And here is a second sample work for you I want to do. And here is a very important thing I want you to do for me. I want to move to Cantonment this coming spring. And Cantonment was where my grandmother went to school for boarding school. I can't hardly raise any crop here on my reservation at the Red Moon. And I'd like you to call all the lawyers there together and have a counsel about this matter. And I would like you to help me that way. And around our reservation here is pretty. We can't raise any stock for our own, and so it is with the crops. After you have looked at this matter and talked it over, you must answer my letter as quick as possible. And our children that is in this school here, when I go to Cantonment, I will take them with me. That is where I go and make some crop at Cantonment. The superintendent here of the school, acting an agent to the farmer, we have here to do nothing to say about when one of us get in trouble by a white man. Everything is mixed pretty bad. Our blacksmith here doesn't fix our wagons anymore. You told me that section lines are there for people to drive, and we have guarantee lines, and the section lines are shut up. So by this letter, White Shield is asking for his help with different areas. Thinking about Cantonment, there's still one building that is left from the boarding school era. For me, I wish that there was some way that that building, I mean, it still looks good. Looks like it's got good bones. And I would love to see that made into a museum or some kind of visitor center on that property. And that would be a way for the Cheyenne-Arapaho to share and show the property there. It's amazing and a blessing that we had men like Temple Houston and Father Peter Powell and men of that caliber to help the Native Americans, the American Indians. It's been I learned a lot doing this research this time. And I even had somebody ask me one time if I knew anything about Custer because of my career where it was at. And knowing our past history with him. And I told the visitor, no, I had not. Well, in turn, he tells me, well, don't you think it'd be good for you to know who your enemy is? So then I started getting curious and started reading about Custer, and one of the books I read, I was thinking, why am I doing this to myself? But he was part of our history. I want to thank you guys for listening to my presentation. And it's good to know that during this time with Temple Houston and the American Indians, it was good for me to see that there was no racial undertones, because he was there to help. Thank you.